Hello and welcome to Chess with Simon. I'm Simon. Welcome to the second edition of From Beginner to Grandmaster. So what we're doing here is we're discovering the whole of chess, starting from the beginning. We're doing it through the games of great players, and today we have two great players. We have Gwain Jones as white, one of the great English attacking players, and Serjey Karjakin, the so-called Minister of Defence, one of the very top players in the world and a brilliant defensive player. So yesterday we looked at this line in the Italian, and when I say yesterday, I mean in video number 1, which actually was yesterday. So now we're going to look at a slightly different move for black. So let's go through. So what we said was this: pawn to e4, which makes way for the bishop, makes way for the queen, and holds the centre. When the bishop moves, it also allows the king to castle. Pawn to e5, black's doing the same thing, makes way for the bishop, makes way for the queen, and starts to begin to prepare castling for black. The white knight attacks the black pawn. Again, this is going to help white to castle. Black knight defends the pawn, Karjakin defends the pawn. This is the most popular move in the position, and probably the best move. I mean, knight f6 is pretty good as well in that position. Knight f6 is pretty good, the Petrov defense. But knight c6 is the most common and probably the best. And then white plays bishop c4, so the bishop goes to a square where it's attacking f7, which is a weak point. If white could possibly land a knight on there, it would fork the queen and the rook, and that square is only defended by one piece, which is the king. Black also goes ahead and develops the bishop to the best square, attacking the white pawn on f2. Now white plays this move c3, which looks a little bit mysterious. Now the idea is, this is preparing d4. So the idea of this move is that d4's coming next move, but black has time to play knight f6, attacking the e-pawn and getting the king ready to castle. White plays d4, that pawn is defended by a pawn and two pieces, so he's not losing anything. Takes, takes, and all of a sudden black's lost a centre pawn and white has taken that c pawn and put it back in the centre. So white has more pawns in the centre. This is something of a victory. The check with the bishop, white's putting the bishop in the way. We went through this in the first video. Same, takes, knight takes, so the knight's on d2, it's not the best square. Pawn d5, really nice move. Wouldn't be possible if the knight was on c3, of course. It would lose a pawn. White takes, the knight takes, and now black has this d5 square that's very important. So black's possession of the d5 square becomes very important. So although white's got one more pawn in the centre, black has this important square. And also it's worth saying that white's pawn is a weak pawn, so it could become a weakness in an endgame. White then plays queen b3, as in the game yesterday. Black plays knight a5. Again, like yesterday. White plays queen a5, the knight goes back, the queen goes back, and then if black played knight a5 again, it would be moving towards a draw. But black plays a different move, which is a good move, which is knight c e7. So the computers don't actually think this is quite as good as knight a5, which just forces a draw on the spot. But it's a good move. It basically reinforces that point on d5, which is so important to black. White castles, a very natural move. And also white's got these beautiful open files. The c file is open. So the c file is half open and the e file is open. So although white has an isolated queen's pawn, there are two open files for white's rooks to use. Black castles, white puts a rook straight on the open file, Gwain Jones. Karjakin plays this useful move c6, which firstly creates a sort of block on that half open file where white might place a rook. So the pawn on c6 is defended by the pawn on b7, which is kind of blocks the file, but also it's protecting the important d5 square, which is very important to black. White moves the knight onto a better square. So what's going to happen here is some very good and sensible defence from black, and some attempts from white to make some progress in the position. So firstly, black's pushing away that bishop off its nice diagonal with the queen behind it. Bishop backs off. Then it's black's placing a different knight on that lovely d5 square. White plays knight c5, so now the bishop can't move away because the bishop's committed to defending the pawn on b7. Again, black's manoeuvring with the knight, put the rook on the half-open file, we talked about that. And then rook b8 defends the b7 pawn to hopefully allow the bishop to move. But then this gives the queen time to attack the pawn on a7. It's all sort of one-move threats, you know. It's all sort of, because black's so solid. White then comes back and attacks the knight on b6, basically tying the queen to defence of the knight. And also, if the bishop moves and the knight moves, then the pawn might drop on b7, although there might be a pin. It's all very complicated. But just white is just probing weaknesses and just trying to tie pieces down. Queen keeps on defending the knight. And then the white knight here is, I mean, black doesn't want to let white take on f6 because that'll break the pawns up. So the knight moves. White's knight back to c3, sort of hoping to exchange off that knight on d5, but it's not going to achieve a great deal because the other knight's just going to take back. White attacks the knight again, so this time white will actually eliminate the minor piece on d5 because white can take twice. And then Karjakin just looks for more exchanges. So white takes. Black decides to take with a pawn actually. So we've got this symmetric pawn structure which is very drawish. The bishop's got to run, and the white queen really has to keep defending the knight on f3, so that because if the bishop went to d3 for instance, I guess the worry is that bishop takes f3 is going to break up the white pawn structure. Black takes, white takes. So now what we've got is symmetric pawn structure, knight against bishop. Actually, the engine thinks it's really dead equal, frankly. The engine thinks it's dead equal. Rook going to the open file is very natural. I mean, the white rook is a long way from being able to invade, but it's still a natural defensive move by a player as experienced and solid as Karjakin. Queen c3, I suppose questioning whether there's an invasion on c7. Karjakin plays g6 because, of course, what you don't want is the queen arriving on h7. So this g6 move is a prophylactic to stop any that battery of the bishop and the queen, which is the only real obvious threat in the position. Bishop d3, moving the king forward. This is a sensible move just to stop, for instance, a queen arriving on h6. I mean, the point I think of going through this game is just to say this line of the Italian is fine for white, but it's possible for black to defend. You know, black has quite a solid defence, and it's an interesting manoeuvring game, but there's not a lot of fireworks, particularly when you get two players of this skill level playing. I mean, if you know, the white player is a kind of strategic player who doesn't want to take too much risk, then this line's pretty useful. But you know, it is defendable by black, and frankly, the computer just thinks it's equal. So black challenges on the open file, looking for exchanges. White takes this way, which is kind of pretty. I suppose if black took on c3, white would have two rooks for the queen, which is an advantage. Although actually, you know what, the computer thinks that's dead level too. But Karjakin didn't go for it. Queen c7 was possible there actually. I don't think it's winning, but it's a pretty good move. White came here, rook came here to close off c7 actually. Karjakin saw that and kind of shut the door. White's just defending the d4 pawn here, which is on a dark square, and so the bishop can't defend it. And also just keeping an eye on that knight on b6. Black attacks it a second time, so white has to defend on d1. You can't defend on c4 because the knight will take it. So the rook has to defend here to avoid the loss of the pawn. the black rook comes back. White rook tries to get active on the open file again. Black rook attacks the pawn again. There we are. Repeated moves. It's the draw. So what did we learn from this? We learned that both players played in a solid classical style. And it was a kind of positional struggle which ended in a draw. Later on, as we progress through chess openings, we'll see more unbalanced openings that create more asymmetric pawn structures. But I think it's really helpful to start off by understanding, you know, the classical and the kind of main lines. It's also worth saying that Ian has added some interesting comments to the last video about the Evans Gambit. So we're going to look at the Evans Gambit in the future, in which basically White pursues lots of these ideas but gives up a pawn to accelerate the game. And so White gets a tempo, an extra move, in exchange for the B pawn, and it's a beautiful, interesting gambit. So it's good to do all of this because we'll see the same ideas in the Evans Gambit, but we'll see quite a lot more fire. Hope you enjoyed that. Chewie's not here. He had his walk today, but we can't go out now because it's raining. Hope you're all well, and I'll see you soon.